2:17 a.m. the 18th of August, 1943, North Atlantic, 80 nautical miles west of the Iberian Peninsula. The destroyer USS Maddox, DD 731, cut through the icy waters at 12 knots, heavy seas, wind at 25 knots, low fragmented cloud cover, a blanket of near-total darkness, the only beam of light, a surface radar, HFDF Type 271, revolving slowly, probing the vast depths. Lieutenant Commander David Stirling, 39 years old, 6 years' experience in anti-submarine warfare, 0 direct encounters with U-boats since his commission. The tension, a palpable charge. On board, the routine was a constant echo of vigilance, the depths of the Atlantic, a relentless hunting ground for Donitz's U-boats, the Maddox, one of the killer hunters, her mission to escort Convoy ONS-18, 42 merchant ships, dispersed courses towards Great Britain, a juicy target for any grey wolf patrolling the routes, the sonar, a rhythmic pulse, blind in the dark, deaf in the immensity. Intelligence reports 3 days prior had indicated activity, a group of 10 U-boats, the Rudeltaktik or Wolfpack, operating in the sector, 200 miles to the south, their target almost certainly this convoy. The probability of an attack was statistically high. The question was not if they would attack, but when and where. On the bridge, Stirling moved with a calculated silence. His gaze scanned the horizon, the only visible light, the faint greenish glow of the radar repeater. 2 operators, young recruits, their eyes glued to the screens, every phantom echo, a possibility of death. The salty spray soaked their wool uniforms, the cold permeated to their bones, the constant roar of the engines, the creaking of the hull, the guttural voice of the ocean. The Maddox, a Fletcher-class vessel, fast, agile, armed with 5 5-inch guns, 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, and crucially, 64 depth charges. Her primary role, detect, attack, destroy, protect. The weight of each merchant vessel, of every life on board, rested upon these men and upon Lieutenant Commander Stirling. His hand tightened on the brass rail. Freezing from exposure, radio communication, reduced to a minimum, silent emissions. The enemy listened, always. The silence. A defensive and offensive tactic. The last HFDF report from the Admiralty 6 hours ago. Vague contact, 90 miles to the east, a Type 7C U-boat, code Wolfgang, potentially racing to intercept this convoy. Suddenly, a phantom echo, a small blip on the surface radar screen. At 7,000 yards, directly astern. A minuscule target, barely distinguishable amidst the sea clutter. But there it was, persistent. The radar operator, Corporal Thomas Jensen, 20 years old, his voice broken by tension. Radar contact, astern, 7,000 yards, moving. Stirling's calm, a thin veil. Identify it. Movement pattern. Is it ours? A knot tightened in every man's stomach. The night had just revealed its secret. Jensen's voice was barely a whisper. Negative, sir. Too slow to be one of ours. No friendly vessels in that sector. Position, drifting, or maneuvering at low speed. Stirling leaned over the radar repeater. The blip persisted, tiny, but unmistakable. A question mark, floating in the Atlantic darkness. The most unsettling possibility, a U-boat on the surface, recharging batteries, observing the convoy. It was a silent ambush. Weapons officer, Stirling's voice was low, controlled. Prepare depth charges, standard attack pattern, set fuses for 50 feet and 150 feet. Alert the engine room, full speed on my command. Lieutenant Jack Riley, weapons officer, nodded. Weapons, depth charges ready, fuses set. The metallic clatter of the depth charge mechanisms astern, preparing. A macabre symphony. The Maddox maintained her current course at 12 knots following the convoy's perimeter. To the U-boat, the destroyer would appear to be just another escort vessel, going about her routine, not a hunter that had smelled blood. "Communications," Sterling ordered. "Alert to escort vessels in the sector. Unidentified radar contact astern of the convoy. Maintain radio silence. Hedgehogs on standby." The transmission was brief, encoded, the message clear. Danger was approaching. Sterling knew that night visibility was almost nil. The U-boat, with its low silhouette, was practically invisible to the eye, even at close range. Only the radar could betray it, or the moon, if it deigned to show itself. The decision was critical: maintain course to avoid alerting the submarine or turn and intercept it. The second option would reveal the Maddox's intention, potentially provoking an immediate dive. "Corporal Jensen, movement pattern of the contact." The question was direct. Jensen, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "Looks like it's accelerating, sir. Slightly. Course. Southeast. Appears to be attempting to flank the convoy's tail." The confirmation. It wasn't a stray merchantman. It wasn't a drifting buoy. It was the Predator, maneuvering to position itself for its lethal attack. Sterling took a deep breath, the smell of saltpeter, of hot metal, of fear. "Navigating officer, set course 305, speed 20 knots. Sonar officer, activate active listening. High-frequency search pattern, as soon as we turn, no delay." Sterling's voice now firmer, more resonant. The hunt had begun. The Maddox turned slowly. The hull heeled under the force of the rudder. The bow pointed east. The propellers began to push with greater force. The turbines let out a sharp whine, increasing revolutions. The destroyer accelerated, cutting through the waves. Her wake, a white furrow in the darkness, headed towards the unknown, invisible target. The ship came to life, transformed from vigilant to hunter. The order rang out. "Sonar, active listening now." A high-frequency pulse traveled through the water. A ghostly ping, rumbling in the night, searching for echoes beneath the surface. Adrenaline surged through their veins. Expectation weighed like lead in the sonar room. Time slowed. Seconds dragged. Each one an eternity. False echoes, a cruel trick of nature. And then, the first clear echo, an unmistakable contact at 8,000 yards. "Sonar contact. Estimated depth, 200 feet. Course east-southeast. Speed, 8 knots. The U-boat had dived, just as Sterling had predicted. The hunt was turning vertical. The Admiralty had warned. Type 7C U-boats were cunning. Their captains, veterans, capable of quick, silent dives. Sterling's order: "Sonar, maintain contact. Navigating officer, interception course. Adjust speed to 25 knots." The Maddox surged forward, her bow breaking the waves. The vibration of the engines ran through the bridge. The sonar screen, the only link to the invisible enemy. Lieutenant Commander Sterling's eyes were fixed on the sonar screen, a flash of light representing the U-boat. The sonar contact persisted at 200 feet depth, an elusive but present target. "Weapons officer, ready for attack. Hedgehog prepared." The Hedgehog, a spigot mortar anti-submarine weapon, designed to fire 24 projectiles in a circular pattern ahead of the destroyer's bow. Unlike depth charges, which exploded at a preset depth, the Hedgehog detonated only on contact. A direct hit, or nothing. The U-boat's strategy after diving was evasion, zigzagging, changing depth, deploying countermeasures. Nixie shots. Small bubble generators designed to confuse sonar, to create false echoes, to deceive the pursuer. Sterling knew it. Every sonar ping was a gamble against time, against the enemy's cunning. Contact at 6,000 yards, turning northeast, depth unaltered. The sonar operator's voice was clear. Despite the tension, the U-boat was attempting to disorient, to break contact. Navigating officer, correct course to 005, maintain speed, maximum attention to sonar. Sterling never took his eyes off it for a second. The Maddox responded like a predator, following its trail in the depths. Time was a cruel factor. Every minute the U-boat remained unattacked increased its chances of escape, or of a counterattack. They could be preparing torpedo tubes underwater. The Maddox would be an easy target if her position was revealed. Silence was vital, but the engine screamed at 25 knots. Sonar! False echoes, detecting 2, perhaps 3 Nixies, around the main contact. The sonar operator's alarm was a sharp note. The U-boat was deploying countermeasures, an old trick, but effective. If the operator made a mistake, the Hedgehog attack would be useless. Focus on the strongest contact, son, the one showing constant movement. Ignore the bubbles. Sterling's voice was imperturbable. The destroyer approached. Vibrations increased. The bow slammed against the water with force. At 3,000 yards, the contact became sharper, more defined. Solid contact, sir. 3,000 yards. Positive identification. Type 7, C submarine. Course northeast. Speed, 8 knots. Confirmation. The target was there, beneath them, in the darkness. Weapons officer, prepare the Hedgehog for firing, on my command. Sterling's order rang out. Lieutenant Riley reaffirmed the preparations. The loaders ready, fuses secured. The Maddox positioned herself directly over the submarine, the 5-inch gun silent, useless in this hunt. Only the Hedgehog had a chance. Sonar! Last range, last depth. Sterling's voice was a hammer. 1,500 yards, 210 feet, submarine turning slightly to port. The attack window was opening. Fire the Hedgehog, the order. A dull thud. 24 projectiles launched from the bow in a deadly parabola towards the dark waters. The U-boat's fate hung on that launch. Silence. Only the splash and the wake of the projectiles. The die was cast. The Hedgehog projectiles struck the water with a dull splash. Seconds later, the sonar remained silent. No detonation. No explosion. There was no thunderous roar to indicate a hit, a victory. The attack had failed. The Admiralty was right. The Hedgehog was a brutally precise weapon. You either hit or you missed entirely. There was no middle ground. Frustration was an icy blow on the bridge. Sterling's jaw tightened. Sonar, maintain contact. Where is it? The sonar operator's voice, this time, held a note of panic. Contact lost, sir. I repeat, contact lost. It's gone. A shiver ran through the crew. The U-boat had vanished into the depths, a ghost dissolving into the Atlantic. Sterling closed his eyes for an instant. Too fast. The U-boat had anticipated the tactic. It had executed an evasive maneuver at the precise moment of firing. A sharp turn, a change of depth, or perhaps a silent descent beneath the thermal layer, a natural phenomenon where temperature differences in the water deflected sonar waves, rendering it invisible. Navigating officer, search pattern, spiral, increase speed to 28 knots, sonar officer, track every pulse, every echo, every bubble. Sterling's order was resolute. He would not give up. The danger of a loose U-boat in the middle of the convoy was unacceptable. The Maddox began to execute the search pattern, turning in concentric circles, widening the area, looking for the vanished enemy. The minutes dragged on. 20 minutes, 30. Every sonar ping a desperate attempt to pick up the trail again. The operator's eyes burned with tension. The silence that now filled the bridge was more deafening than the roar of the engines. The ghost of the submarine stalked them. Suddenly, Corporal Jensen, the surface radar operator, looked up from his screen. Radar contact, 600 yards to starboard, surfacing. Jensen's exclamation was a shot in the dark. The U-boat had surfaced, directly alongside the destroyer, a bold, desperate, calculated maneuver. Sterling reacted in an instant. Weapons officer, 5-inch guns, aim to starboard, switch on the searchlights, full speed to 090. The ship veered sharply. The Maddox heeled over in a tight turn. The xenon searchlights flared to life, tearing through the darkness, illuminating the ocean surface. They revealed the silhouette of a Type 7C U-boat, barely 500 yards away. Her conning tower, wet and dark, its hatches still closed. The German crew were unaware of the destroyer's exact position, or had surfaced under a false sense of security. The submarine had materialized like a spectre under the intense light of the searchlights. Sterling saw the opportunity, clear, precise, deadly. Open fire! Main gun's shrapnel pattern, 5-second burst. Sterling's order was a thunderclap in the night. The 5-inch guns roared, unleashing an inferno of fire and steel. 10 shells from each gun, 50 projectiles in seconds, ripping through the darkness towards the U-boat. An inevitable rain of death. The submarine shuddered violently under the impacts. Chunks of metal flew through the air. The hull was punctured. The conning tower disintegrated. The battle had taken a decisive turn. The hunter had been hunted. The U-boat convulsed under the punishment from the Maddox's 5-inch guns. The projectiles were not just explosive, they were armor-piercing. Each impact a mortal wound on the thin pressure hull. The sound was infernal, tearing metal, muffled explosions beneath the surface, steel fragments flying across the deck like shrapnel under the blinding light of the searchlights. A nightmare come true. The conning tower partially detached, listing like a broken tooth. Seawater began to pour through the breaches in the hull. The U-boat was dying, slowly, painfully. It listed to port. The bow began to sink into the sea. At the cries of "Cease fire," the guns fell silent. The night returned to a chilling quiet, broken only by the churning of the U-boat as it slipped towards the abyss. Lieutenant Commander Sterling watched unemotionally the end of Type 7C, code Wolfgang. A war machine transformed into floating scrap in mere seconds. The German captain's strategy had been risky, attempting a dive during the Hedgehog attack, then surfacing, believing the darkness would protect him, thinking the destroyer would have lost the trail. A fatal error, calculated, and executed with a brutal efficiency. "Douse the searchlights," Sterling's order echoed. Darkness once again enveloped the scene. Only the faint starlight flickered on the Maddox's deck. "Lifeboats, rescue team, prepare for launch. Lookouts, keep an eye out for survivors." Humanity reclaimed its place after the battle's roar. Despite the war, there was a protocol, a respect for the vanquished. The Maddox approached slowly to the sinking point, the hiss of steam escaping from the U-boat's entrails, the smell of diesel fuel mixed with salt water, a pungent aroma of death. The submarine's stern rose almost vertically, exposed for the last time to the sky. Then, with a final gurgle, it slipped beneath the waves, into oblivion. 2,000 feet of icy water. Its tomb. The lifeboats launched into the sea. The crew scanned the surface with powerful spotlights, searching for any sign of life. The sea was a dark, indifferent blanket. Minutes passed, stretching long. Hope faded with each wave. The water was too cold, the surprise of the attack too sudden. Finally, a voice from one of the lifeboats. "Contact! Survivors to port! 3 men!" The news was a small ray of light in the darkness. 3 men clung to floating wreckage from the conning tower, exhausted, frozen, but alive. They were German sailors, their faces covered in soot, their eyes filled with shock and defeat. Sterling watched as the survivors were hauled aboard. They were young, too young for the brutality of war. They had been lucky, somehow, to escape the hell of the Wolfgang. Its captain and most of its crew had gone with their submarine to the depths. A short, concise combat report would be sent to the Admiralty. U-boat Type 7C, code Wolfgang sunk. Position, coordinates, survivors, 3. The cold efficiency of victory. The Maddox set course again, to rejoin the convoy. The combat air patrol over the Yorktown at Midway, the encounter with the Zeros a different duel, but with the same premise, survival above all else. The war continued. The sea would claim more lives, and the Maddox would be there, waiting. The 3 German prisoners were taken below deck, towards the infirmary, suffering from severe hypothermia, but alive. Lieutenant Commander Sterling descended from the bridge, his face a mask of weariness and contained relief. Lieutenant Riley, the weapons officer, approached him. "Good work, sir. A proper bullseye. Never seen such accuracy in the dark." Sterling nodded. "Luck and preparation, Riley. And the enemy's mistake." The crew, still tense, began to feel a surge of enthusiasm. A sunken U-boat meant temporary safety for the convoy, but it was a victory, a palpable win in the constant brutality of the Atlantic War. Confirmation of the sinking would be sent via coded radio link to Convoy Command and the Admiralty. The code was simple. Contact resolved. No immediate danger. In the infirmary, the ship's doctor examined the survivors. The men were in shock, babbling in German, their faces drained of colour, their uniforms soaked, a constant drip onto the metallic floor. One of them, the youngest, barely 18, wept silently. The reality of their defeat had struck him with the force of a hammer. Sterling entered, stopping at the entrance. His presence was imposing despite the silence. The doctor turned. "They're stable, sir. A lot of cold water. They'll need to dry off and have something hot. They don't appear to be seriously injured apart from the shock." Sterling nodded, his gaze fixed on the young German sailor. His eyes showed no hatred, only a cold assessment of the cost of war. "Will they be able to provide any information?" Sterling's question was practical, not sadistic. The doctor hesitated. "Too soon, sir. They need rest, to warm up, perhaps by morning." Sterling nodded again. "Right. Treat them, but with vigilance and no privileges. They are prisoners of war. Humanity under the strict limits of conflict." He left the infirmary and returned to the bridge. The Maddox had now resumed her cruising speed of 12 knots, patrolling the convoy's perimeter. The surface radar slowly revolved again, sweeping the night. The sonar once again emitted its rhythmic pings. Routine restored, but with a difference. The air was a little lighter. Duty done. Coffee was waiting on the bridge, hot and black. Lieutenant Commander Sterling drank it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through his body. His eyes returned to the horizon, still dark, still vast. The night silence was different now, not the foreboding silence of the hunt, but that of calm after the storm. He knew this was just one U-boat, just one battle in a war that would last years. There would be more encounters, more deaths. But for this night, Convoy ONS-18 was safe. Thanks to the quick reaction, the audacity of the Maddox, and the cold efficiency of her crew. The destroyer's wake stretched like a white scar on the dark surface. The wind whistled through the masts. The sailors, at their posts, kept watch, each with their own story, their own fear, and their own determination. Victory was a brief respite before the Atlantic would again claim its toll. Duty continued, silent, uninterrupted. Dawn arrived like a cold promise, a faint grey glow on the eastern horizon, tinging the clouds with purple and gold, revealing the immensity of the convoy. Dozens of merchant ships scattered across the Atlantic, small iron islands floating on an indifferent sea. Lieutenant Commander Sterling was still on the bridge. He hadn't slept. The exhaustion was evident in his red-rimmed eyes, yet his mind remained alert. The navigating officer handed him a fresh coffee. "Looks like a quiet day, sir." Sterling took the cup. "The Atlantic always holds surprises, Lieutenant. Never let your guard down." Wisdom forged in experience. The 3 German prisoners had been briefly interrogated by the Maddox's intelligence officer. They had revealed nothing critical. Young sailors with little access to strategic plans, only names, ranks, and the devastating impact of their defeat. They had confirmed that their U-boat, U-472, was indeed the reported Wolfgang. Its mission, to intercept ONS-18. The compiled report would be radioed to the Admiralty, along with a detailed account of the combat. Every projectile, every maneuver, every second would be dissected, analysed. Learning was vital for the survival of the others. War was fought in every detail. Sterling went down to the officers' mess. Food was sparse but hot, scrambled eggs and coffee. He sat in silence, listening to the conversations, murmurs of relief, of controlled euphoria. The crew celebrated in their own way, but the impeccable discipline was the mark of experience. He observed his men. Corporal Jensen, barely 20, his eyes still bright with the excitement of the previous night. He had identified the echo, had kept his composure under immense pressure. Lieutenant Riley, more senior but equally proud. His weapons team had responded with lethal precision. They were the backbone of his ship. After breakfast, Sterling retired to his cabin. For the first time in 24 hours, he shed his uniform and showered. The cold water was a balm to his tense muscles. He shaved, looking at his reflection in the mirror. A man aged by war, but resolute, relentless. Duty guided him. He recalled a recent report from command. Massive U-boat losses in recent months. Allied technology was improving. Radar, sonar, patrol aircraft, escort groups. The Atlantic was becoming a more dangerous place for predators. The tide was slowly beginning to turn. But the greatest lesson wasn't technology, it was the mind, the capacity for adaptation. Anticipation. The captain of U-472 had been a cunning, dangerous adversary. But he had made one mistake, a single miscalculation. And it had cost him his vessel, his crew, and his life. In the North Atlantic there was no room for error. Sterling lay down in his bunk. The rocking of the ship was a familiar lullaby. He closed his eyes. At last. Rest. He owed a deep debt to his men, to fortune, and to the cold embrace of the ocean. Sleep came quickly, a temporary oblivion before duty would again reclaim him. War made no pauses. The vigil was eternal. Sterling awoke hours later, his energy renewed, the exhaustion diminished. The feeling of alarm was a distant echo. He ascended to the bridge once more. The sun, now high, illuminated the Atlantic, a deep, undulating blue with white foamy crests, revealing the immensity of the convoy. Dozens of merchantmen scattered across the ocean, small iron islands floating on an indifferent sea. Lieutenant Commander Sterling was still on the bridge. He hadn't slept. The routine was a balm, a constant rhythm of vigilance. Communications reported calm in the sector. The other destroyers maintained their positions. Last night's hunt was an isolated but significant incident, an important victory that boosted morale. He met Lieutenant Riley in the chart room, reviewing navigation logs and damage reports for the Maddox. The U-boat's explosion caused some cracks in the aft plating, sir. Nothing serious, but it will require repairs in port, Riley reported professionally. Sterling nodded. Priority after the escort. We can't risk structural failure if we encounter another surprise. Lady Luck granted us a clean victory with no damage to ourselves. Riley nodded, understanding his commander's caution. War taught that complacency was a death sentence. Throughout the rest of the day, the Maddox continued her patrol. The sky was clear, visibility excellent. Catalina patrol aircraft flew over the convoy, tiny dots in the blue immensity, their shadows an aerial shield against new submarine threats. In the afternoon, the Admiralty responded to Sterling's report. A brief, professional congratulation and a directive. Continue with convoy, maintain alert. New wolf packs detected further west. The information was a reminder. The threat never completely disappeared. There was always another lurking. Sterling took the report to his cabin. He read it again. He thought about the enemy's plans, the wolf packs further west, perhaps seeking more direct routes to British ports or waiting for the escorts to drop their guard. Naval warfare was a large-scale, relentless game of chess. He recalled an article he had read before the war about a fighter commander in the Pacific, a certain Thatch, who had devised a tactic with matchsticks so his Wildcats could face the more maneuverable Zeros. Adaptation, innovation, survival. These were the keys, not only for pilots but for every man on every ship. He sat at his desk, took out a notebook and a pencil. He began to draw diagrams of destroyer formations, sonar search patterns, new attack tactics with depth charges, with the Hedgehog. Based on last night's experience, on the U-boat's evasion maneuver, on the audacity of its surfacing, Sterling's mind did not rest, always seeking an advantage, a new trick for survival. He knew that every sunken U-boat was a lesson, every engagement an opportunity to learn, to improve. The war in the Atlantic demanded a constant evolution of tactical thinking, of technology, and of human courage. The Maddox was part of that evolution, a tooth in the grinder that slowly but inexorably wore down the enemy. The notebook filled with scribbles, arrows, numbers, ideas. Shadows lengthened. The sun began to descend over the horizon. The Maddox continued her course eastward towards Great Britain. The Atlantic still held secrets and dangers, but the fighting spirit remained firm, unbreakable. Night fell again, with the same impenetrable darkness that had witnessed the previous battle. But this time, the atmosphere on the Maddox's bridge was different. There was a tense calm, a newfound confidence. The crew worked with efficiency, each one an essential cog in the war machine. Convoy ONS-18 continued its uninterrupted advance. Sonar and radar reports were routine. No suspicious echoes, no blips on the screen suggesting a new threat. For now, the calm held, but Sterling knew it was a fragile, temporary truce. He stood on the bridge, observing the horizon. The salty breeze struck his face. The roar of the engines, the constant sound of the sea, had etched itself into his soul. War had transformed ordinary men into warriors, into sentinels, into protectors. The German prisoners slept in the makeshift brig below deck. Their destination was a prisoner of war camp in Great Britain. For Sterling, they were a tangible reminder of life and death on the vast chessboard of the Atlantic. Every decision, every maneuver, had human, brutal consequences. The Maddox would continue her escort until the convoy was safely in British waters. Then, she would return to the hunt, to patrol, to the endless battle against the U-boats. The mission never ended. It merely changed its stage. Sterling thought about the future, about the new combat methods that would emerge, about the constant evolution of tactics. Naval warfare was a brutal laboratory of innovation. Every new ship, every new weapon, every new strategy, a response to the threat, and a new threat for the enemy. He knew that victory in the Atlantic would not be spectacular. There would be no single decisive battle. It would be a slow attrition, a constant trickle of losses for both sides. But the accumulation of small victories, like last night's, was what would ultimately tip the balance. Lieutenant Commander David Sterling sought no medals, no accolades. Only the fulfillment of duty, the protection of his men, of the merchant ships, of the vital lifeline of supplies to Great Britain. That was his purpose, his reason for being in the midst of war. As the Maddox cut through the waves in the darkness, Sterling felt the pulse of the ship vibrating beneath his feet, an extension of himself, a machine and a crew united by a single goal, survival and victory at any cost. The horizon remained uncertain. The shadows of war persisted, but under the command of men like Sterling, hope was not extinguished. It was kept alive in every sonar ping, in every radar sweep, in every gun blast, in every dawn over the Atlantic. The fight would continue, unbroken,